Having spent the last few days hand stitching all the binding down and doing the places where the quilt as you go join the borders onto this quilt, I figure I need to give you a bit more information about what you need to think about if you want to do borders quilt as you go. G'day, I'm Sharon. Welcome to my channel. This border I did very boringly. It was a 2 3/4 inch wide piece of fabric. I stitched it to a backing of the same width and a wadding of the same width, and I only stitched down each side of it. I could have quilted the whole lot of it. So for all those people who are perhaps thinking about, they've been learning how to do free motion quilting, they've got a bundle of samples, they'd like to turn them into something, and this is a way to do that. You can also make your border essentially a sample of another kind of quilting. You need to try and get them all either square, the same size, in which case you can do something like this, or you need them to be in rows where they're the same height. It's not easy to do this with randomly sized pieces. So let's just imagine this is the inside of my quilt. All my squares are done. If I haven't got these pieces covered before I add my border, then I've got to get them covered before I can do the join between the border and the main part of the quilt. So by having all of them finished in both directions before I add the borders, I'm doing that covering when it's the smallest size possible. All of my pieces in here, vertical and horizontal, were done before I attached the borders, and that means that when the borders went on, this is going to cover the ends of these pieces. When you're adding borders to things, you need to think about what order things are going to be sewn on. I put the border on the top and bottom of this quilt, and I finished off that piece of tape, top and bottom, which is up there, before I added the side piece on. And that means that that side piece, when it was added on, it covered that join and it covered where the covering for the join went as well. You need to think what order are things going to go in. The next little bit about this, if I'm attaching borders and I put the border down here, this border has to come out and cover the end of that border, which means I have to put the border on and I have to do the covering over it before I put this on. So you have to think in the order of which things have to be done first so that the later stuff will cover those ends. You can find yourself in a situation where you've got to unpick something and try and tuck it underneath, or you've got no real place to hide the end of that tape. Purely by chance, the amount of fabric that I had available for me to make my borders meant that the borders ended up at 2 3/4 inches. By the time that extra piece of tape covered that over, the actual coloured piece there is 3 inches. And that happens to be pretty much half of a square on my quilt, and that looks good. There would be some sizes that would look quite odd, but that one looks good. It would also look good if I had 6 inches of border out there. So I need to be able to think about that, what fabric I've got available, and how big do I want my borders to be. If I had decided to make my borders 6 inches wide, I would definitely need to be doing some quilting on them. And there are 2 times that I can do that. I can either quilt it when it is a single piece, 6 inches wide. I'm ready to go. I'm going to put some straight lines of stitching down it, or perhaps I'm going to practice stippling or something like that on it. And that's fine. And then I would add the already quilted part to the quilt. Alternatively, I could decide that since it's right at the edge, I don't mind quilting it after it's attached. It's really an up to you thing. Probably for most people it's a bit easier to deal with a border, however many feet long, but this wide. But this is an option for you. Do you want to quilt it before you add it to the quilt? Probably most people would prefer to do that because it's lighter and it's smaller. It is still going to be the full length of the quilt, but it's not going to be a whole quilt. Or maybe you feel that you can handle it when it's right at the edge of the quilt. I have a different quilt made entirely differently to this one, with an entirely different overall appearance, and I did it with Quilt As You Go. Next time I'm planning to get that one up so you can have a look and see a different style but done with the same kind of quilt as you go. See you next time.